So I want to talk about another fundamental issue that is facing humanity right now, and that is if we want to stop global warming, we are going to have to come up with a different way of producing energy. I mean, there's
Mhm,
no way about this, and that's going to require us to make incredible systems change,
mhm.
which to me is going from this genius mentality to this growth mentality if we want to make systematic change to it. And in the book, you profile some meetings that you had with the head of HR and the then CEO of Shell
Mhm.
in Hague. And I remember before I went to Lowe's, I was a practice leader at Arthur Anderson, and we were the largest consulting firm to all of the energy companies. And I remember sitting in a room, must have been somewhere around 2000. I'm trying to think, probably around 2002, 2003, when we
Mm.
were at ExxonMobil. And at that point, they were talking about that we had hit the inflection point that from this point forward, oil reserves were only going to come down. And this is before they found that they could do fracking in a different
Mhm,
way.
mhm.
But it was so interesting because even then, looking back a couple of decades ago, the companies knew that they were going to have to change.
That's right.
What do you think is getting in the way of this change? And how do you think people could apply this alternate mindset to think differently about how we produce energy in the future? Because I think these companies are so tied to their profit that they're not really tied to what the alternative could be if things were done differently.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think my work with Shell shows what's possible here. I think many of these companies are legacy companies. Shell's been around for 100 years, right? More than 100 years. And obviously, the way that oil and gas is produced is different today than it was then. But what's very clear is that this energy transition is coming. And we don't know exactly how fast, we don't know exactly when, but we know it's here. And what that will mean is that workers from people in the oil fields, people in the deep well platforms in the middle of the ocean, people around the world are going to have to be working differently, right? There's going to be new technologies to learn, there's going to be just completely new partnerships that are going to have to be developed. And in order to meet the energy needs of the world in a more sustainable and ecologically valid way. And so I think that these companies know this is happening and they don't exactly know how to inspire that kind of change. And ultimately, it's a mindset shift that needs to happen at the organizational level and then come all the way down into the way that we actually work on a day to day basis. And then trickling down to the individual level. And how Shell went about this was really to think about how safety is their number one priority, as with many oil and gas companies. If you have a safety accident, right, it's huge reputationally and it's really problematic. And so safety has always been one of their main priorities. And they had this goal called Goal Zero, where they really wanted zero leaks across all pipeline functions and also no fatalities in the process of extracting or processing oil and gas. And they were able to get these kinds of metrics down pretty significantly across time, but they were never able to actually reach goal zero. And they tried everything. They tried all the behavioral science nudges, right? When I went into the Hague, into their office, there's a huge screen that tells you goal zero and where they are with relation to that. Everyone gets a lanyard that describes all the safety steps that need to be happening for their particular context. And even the executives are wearing the lanyard around the safety protocols. So they had many of these signs and signals culturally that safety mattered most. But one of the things that they hadn't really done is to think about how the mindset of people there on the ground, contractors who are not necessarily technically even Shell employees, but who are certainly important for achieving goal zero, how they might be motivated to actually look more proactively and vigilantly for ways in which their processes could be improved in order to meet this safety goal. And so they'd been working a lot on psychological safety, making sure people felt comfortable that if they saw a problem or if they had a way something could be that was a mistake that was made, that they could raise their hand to their supervisor and say, hey, here is an issue that's happened, or here's a mistake that's been made. But that still hadn't actually produced this positive, proactive vigilance towards ways we actually might change the way that we are doing things to learn something new, to actually make different progress when it comes to the safety goal. And so we thought, well, maybe growth mindset culture, which is about learning, it's about developing, and we called it learner mindset there, how to actually be a learner in what we're doing and how to improve our day to day practices, that might actually get us there. And so it started at the very top. The leaders created their own growth mindset stories. They had this value communicated through their teams and through their leadership all the way to individual workers. And then they also looked at their policies and practices because you can't say you value something and then not have it actually show up in what matters most, the material outcomes of your day to day employees. And so they started to work on their policies, their practices. They looked at the hot and bright spots within their organization. Where was growth mindset culture already very strong? Where were there some pockets of fixed mindset culture? And what could they learn from the way the growth mindset culture was taking off in the organization to apply it to the more fixed minded context? And ultimately, they had a couple of individuals raise some ideas for innovating on their process. And in that year, 2.5, 3 years after we started working together, they were actually able to reach goal zero, and their competitors did not. And they've been able to maintain that over time. So I think that this growth mindset culture really orients us to new ways of working, new collaborations, learning from competitors rather than just competing with people. What is it that others are doing well that we might be able to adopt, not necessarily wholesale, but actually apply to our own way of authentically working and who we are as an organization, what our resources are. Thinking about how to prime people to, yes, be willing to make mistakes, but to really wrest the learning from those mistakes at all times so that we can communicate what that learning is across teams so we don't make the same mistake twice. Making mistakes is going to happen in any transformation, particularly when you're taking on a challenge like climate change and retrofitting your whole process and your whole organization towards that goal is to address climate change and energy transformation. And so by doing this kind of thing through the lens of the growth mindset, we were able to really have people think differently and to be willing at the individual level to learn new things and to approach their job differently. And that produced success up and down the organization, not just with Goal Zero, but in many other ways as well.